Our last speaker is Just van Rossum. I don't know if many of you know him by name. I have to admit I didn't. But I do know a project that he has worked on a lot. So raise your hands, please, for everybody who has heard of Lowlands Festival.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, that's quite a lot of people who have actually been to Lowlands. Me? Okay, still quite some people. Just is actually one of the founding fathers of the whole Lowlands Festival identity. So he used generative design, together with Hansje van Halen, to create the whole identity of Lowlands that they've been using the last couple of years. They actually won a very large design award for it as well. And he's going to talk to us about it. He's going to explain how he did it. So everybody, big round of applause for the last speaker.
Thank you very much. It's the Lowlands story is there's a lot of people involved. I only played a part, which I will try to explain. Thank you for having me at Digital Wednesdays. I'm using a clicker. This slide is mostly to illustrate how old I am, which is very. This is the first computer that I ever worked with when I was 15 years old. And I really like restrictions, and I somehow think this relates back to this time, because this computer was, well, I'm not even nostalgic about it. It was a piece of shit. It had literally 1 kilobyte of memory, not 1 megabyte and 1 gigabyte, 1 kilobyte. That's 1,024 bytes, so that's barely enough to store a handful of tweets. It's really anyway. But what you could do with that, you had to hook it up to your television, and you could. It had a very bad keyboard. The only thing you could do with it was to program it. So I kind of was forced into learning to program, which I did and started to enjoy more and more. Somehow I didn't end up directly into a career of programming. I started studying graphic design. And for a long time I thought the programming, oh, that's a nice hobby next to it, and I enjoy that, and then there's graphic design. But already somehow in the second year of my studies I realized there's actually a very interesting overlap there, where programming can be applicable to graphic design or typographic design, or where you can do interesting experiments. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. These days I'm a teacher. Also at KBK, indeed, as Vera said, she was 1 semester long a few years ago. She studied in my class. I work with the language Python, which happens to be developed by my older brother, who also helped me teach how to learn programming. It was really nice to have someone on call who like, hey, how does this work? And he would just explain that to me. Anyway, much later, once I was teaching, I'm teaching in 2 departments, graphic design at KBK and type media, which is our master for type design. I'm more or less specialized in type design besides programming. Okay, there's the timer. I'm already running out of time. Type design is a very niche profession within a niche profession, pretty much. And the tools to do type design are almost necessarily limited, because the market for such tools is so small. So there's no company like Adobe who builds these huge, perfect tools that work for everyone. So you always have to make do with what is there. These days it's a lot better, there's a lot more choice. But still, as a type designer, it's a very useful skill to be able to do some programming. So you can either write a script to automate a certain boring task, or to create your own tools to do specific tasks, or, well, to experiment. So in the early 2000s, around 2003, we kind of realized we need to teach our students a bit of programming, so that at least they can try to also acquire these skills. And since Python was the language that was used within type design by that time, I was looking at processing, and I saw the work of John Maeda, whose students went on to develop processing. And the idea is clear. If you have, I will show you, there's this thing called Drawbot, which I'm trying to explain. Anyway, there's a field of text where you type a program. This is a trivial program that doesn't do anything smart, but it just sets a color, it draws a shape, it sets another color, it draws another shape. You run it and you get a result. So this is a little bit inspired by how processing works, except it's based on Python, and the output is very much a two-dimensional 2D vector graphics. I'm going to stress that several times. It's a profoundly 2D kind of application. And it was, I wrote this environment called Drawbot in around 2003 for our students, so to make it more fun to learn to program. And later on, about 10 years later, 2013, it was more or less rewritten from scratch by a former student of mine called Frederik Berlaan, who added lots of cool features, and suddenly we could export multi-page PDFs, and we could export GIF files, so we could actually program animations. So then there came a phase. This is a project that I started a few years back called Daily Drawbot, where I would do a little exercise. I was pretty much exercising myself to learn things about the subject of programming. And I made these little animations that I started to collect on this Tumblr thing back when Tumblr was still a thing. And it was daily for about 2 months, I suppose. So anyway, no longer daily. Anyway, it's now a collection of stuff that I did. This was one of the first animations I made with Drawbot, and there's some funny color artifacts here that are caused by the projector here. So, but anyway, what you see here is a bunch of squares that are distorted slightly. They have a black stroke around it, well, in this case purple, and they're just drawn on top of each other from left to right, and then by moving them in the right way, suddenly I got this thing that almost came to life, and it almost became 3D. It became dimensional, as if you could touch it. It has some shadowy effects, but those are literally caused by the lines, the strokes around the squares. So somehow I was fascinated. I accidentally created this thing that looks three-dimensional, where it's all still in very much a 2D environment. I went on to do a whole bunch more things, getting more, well, sometimes sticking to really graphical, simple things, playing with curves, playing with algorithms, playing with patterns, with modular shapes, grids of shapes. All kinds of shapes, letter shapes sometimes. Sometimes I saw something online and decided, why doesn't this image move? And I kind of recreated, so this was, the still version of this was an image that I saw on Instagram, and much later only I realized I actually knew the person who made that, but it was this done in a very analog way with a lenticular filter, a lens, a piece of plastic or glass with this horizontal ribs in it. And that image was great, but didn't move. But I quickly realized how you could do things like this. So I recreated it with a bit of code. And one of the most fun aspects I'm going to show here, it's a very short loop actually. So it goes on endlessly because the end of the animation just goes seamlessly into the beginning. So that became one of my other restrictions that are artificial, like try to make a perfect loop. And well, code actually makes it makes it relatively easy. I just put this slide during Vera's talk because Tim was showing this image, the still image, and I have a different story where that came from. You're probably right, but this was one of those things. I saw that image, and why doesn't it move? Well, it didn't move because it was made in the 60s, but the system was so clear how it works that it just had to be animated. So I just grabbed this. Luckily, I have my archive with me, so. And sometimes I worked on teaching myself how to deal with 3D coordinates, 3D math, build some letters in a 3D way, but still without using 3D software. Likewise, this particular example was an exercise to play a bit with 3D coordinates. I found a JavaScript example of how to calculate the spiral on a sphere. I managed to translate that to Python, and then I drew it in a way. This is still done in the Drawbot environment with this 2D thing. I will move to the next slide, and I will pause this, because this demonstrates how it's actually done. It's just drawing a whole bunch of flat circles. If you're still in the illusion of the previous one, you might see these circles as little spheres, but they're just flat circles. And by just drawing enough of them, you get the illusion. You sort them from back to front, and they're colored from dark to light from the front. So let me go back. Oops. Oh wait, the wrong buttons. I'm going all ahead of myself. So this was the one So yeah, this is just a whole bunch of circles drawn on top of themselves, giving the illusion of some 3D stuff. Anyway, similarly experimenting with some noise algorithms, and well, you should really see this in very, very high resolution. It's a little tricky. Some letter experiments. Here I was trying to figure out how to slice a three-dimensional boxy shape with an arbitrary plane and kind of slice a letter that was also generated on the spot. If you look closely, it goes from a light E to a very heavy E. This was an early wireframe version, and I went on to turn it into this. This is a very ultra slow motion. I have a version on YouTube that's the whole loop is 4 minutes long. It's very relaxing, but still, this. You see, this looks also very dimensional, and you see some shadow effects. This is still the shadow, the kind of a tacky shadow effect that is possible within the PDF drawing model. So it's still a very flat kind of thing. There's no real I mean, I do some real 3D math to calculate the intersections, but how it's drawn, it's using a purely flat model, just some trickery to get it going. Okay. I'm halfway through now. I'm going to do a quick live demo. I did a project together. From now on, there will be some more things about collaboration. This was initiated by Luna Mauder, who got the commission from Stijn, the studio for electronic improvised music in Amsterdam, to do, let me see if it's working. Okay, here. So she had the idea as part of a new identity to work with letters that were made out of transparent tape. And this is an institute that has not a lot of money, a lot of creativity, a lot of smart people working there. So it was decided that mostly the people from the institute themselves would implement the designs, but there would be a system for letters. And Luna thought, okay, with the tape lettering, that's a nice thing to do. It's just a lot of work. Can we automate that? She contacted me and my friend and colleague Eric van Blokland, and we said, yeah, that sounds like a fun thing. Let's program tape. So we ended up making a custom application that starts, I mean, you can type a word, hello world, for instance. Well, let's just stick with hello. It's a very simple stroke-based typeface that Eric drew. I wrote most of the code of this project. But there were some rules that were partially invented by Luna already. Like there's this, you can place new sets of tapes next to the previous ones. And then there are some rules that they cannot overlap too much, just a little. So here, but it becomes this toy box to play with. There's some parameters you can play with. We can add some random numbers that things are slightly less precise. Let's start over from a slightly different, or we can make things rotate. Anyway, so it's applying the algorithm again. And, well, sometimes you get something really unreadable, but this was really a toy for the people at Stijn themselves to be able to create typography based on these rules. It cannot be a font. It's still kind of typography. What is typography? What is lettering? What is, I don't know. So anyway, it's kind of this toy application that they could play with themselves. I'll go right back to the presentation. So collaboration number 1. Let's see, this was not a collaboration. V2 is an institute in Rotterdam. They call themselves the Lab for the Unstable Media. They put up shows and for digital artists, video artists. They have a fantastic video wall of an insane resolution, and well, they support artists that work in this field. And they asked me to design a new logo type. Again, this is also an institute with not a lot of money. They didn't need a full corporate design because they have smart people themselves that can operate computers that have some visual insights. They just wanted a new logo type, and I proposed, and they accepted eventually, a logo type that is very dynamic. It's could be made to respond to things, but for now it's just something that is very fluid. There's a whole bunch of parameters that can be played with. The contrast, the shapes, the angle. Let's see. So the width proportions, the weight. So, and all these things are a valid version of the logo, and just depending on, well, background or the medium in which they are working. And you know, they call themselves Lab for the Unstable Media, so how could they possibly have a logo that is fixed, that is not changing? It has to be something fluid. At least that was my thing, and they agreed with that. Anyway, V2, later on, okay, yeah, it can have some contrast with a fake calligraphy pen, and that pen can rotate. There's some things that are really not quite standard in other kind of morphing things. We made some treatments in various layers with colors that could possibly be animated, different proportions for different purposes, and a little tagline where the typography is moving. So this is something they only recently started using on their website. Anyway, this is all to, okay, well, one more tiny example of a commission where I was asked to do something using this technology. Neolife is an online magazine that deals with biotechnology, and they asked me to make some treatments of their logo, and I think they were only used for a very brief moment of time, but anyway, I like the result of this bubbling things. On to the last 5 minutes of my talk about the Lowlands Festival. So this was, I must stress, I am a collaborator. Hansje van Halem is the main designer. If you haven't heard of her, she is a graphic designer from Amsterdam, and I'll take you on a very brief tour of her website. She has a very distinctive style. She's mostly a poster designer, book designer. She's making these physical, large-scale typographic sculpture things. It's a very specific and personal style that she does. She was approached by Lowlands, like, hey, would you like to do a new identity for our festival, where tens of thousands of people come, which was a very different kind of assignment than she usually got. So she was, and you know, she works digitally, she works in Illustrator, and she's amazing. She's doing things with Illustrator, and you can almost never guess how she did it. So she's really clever with that. I ran into her a couple of years before, and she was very briefly a colleague of mine at KBK, and I asked her, like, hey, is there some programming or coding involved in your work? And she said, no, I just do everything in Illustrator. Well, she's just really clever with using that tool. Well, apparently my question got stuck in the back of her mind, because when she was approached by Lowlands to do this large-scale thing, she thought, if we're going to do something like that, I need some automation. The way I make things is just not going to work at that scale. You know, one of it stops here, this W here below, W for W. It's kind of the starting point, if I remember correctly, that has been the starting point for the whole identity for the Lowlands Festival. The first for the 2017 issue, and let's see. So we talked, I showed her the same things, that treatments, how I can automate things. She showed me like how she did it. I mean, this is already coming from the software that I made, but it's very closely based on how she did her typographic treatments. So she actually showed me the steps. Well, then I do this, and then I do that, and it turns out to process one word in Illustrator would take her about 40 minutes. Well, obviously that's not going to work if you're going to use that style on such a scale. Well, luckily I was able to see through how she did it and how to automate the various tasks and turn it into a machine, as we call it, that pretty much makes this treatment. And we have all kinds of parameters that we can adjust in terms of contrast, in terms of details in the shapes, in terms of text, even animations or things can be moved. It's basically based on a grid. I was planning to have, okay, this is Hansje talking about her project at the Typographics Conference in New York back in 2017. So you see the then new Lowlands logo in the back, or one version of it. This is also, it's a fluid system, there's not one true version. Anyway, the live demo I'm going to have to skip. Obviously, the first year the whole identity was relatively black and white and simple. That was the idea. Turned out at a project that scale, it gets boring a bit too soon. So Hansje and her assistant, she had to hire someone. She works together with Marjolein Rinkes, who became her right hand in terms of Lowlands design. They realized we need some color. And at the end of the first season, we already added some color features to the machine, but in 2018, the color went completely overboard. I implemented things to create multiple layers and layers that could interact and create more colors. So this is all, a custom design tool, as it were, that I made and explained to them, but they are using it. I mean, sometimes I run into something, hey, can your machine do this and this? And then I might have to add a new feature. But you know, just the sheer amount of stuff that needs to be produced, whether it's print or physical things like wristbands, you know, I had virtually nothing to do with that. So this is really Hansje and Marjolein's work as graphic designers. But they used my tool, these large-scale patterns on the fences, merchandise, all kinds of stuff. So yeah, 2018 became super, super colorful and super complex. And big screens became more and more important. Then the other thing they had run into in the second year that Hansje was involved is that even though I made some animation options in the original version, you saw that wobbling W, there was a lot more. Every parameter in the grid was animatable. The text could be, well, you'll see some other examples that came from that animation system. But it turns out it was relatively limited, and it was also a little difficult to make it interesting enough. So adding color layers was one thing, but the other genius step was that Hansje approached an animator, an actual professional animator called Jurriaan Hos, who had a lot of experience to collaborate. And they sat together and they tried a couple of things, and in the end, I added functionality to the machine so it could read in graphic animations that Jurriaan would provide. So what we see here is like two layers. It's probably also treated in After Effects later, that I don't know really. Okay, but he created this abstract, fairly geometric loops, graphic loops, that were used as input in my Lowlands machine, and sometimes it was combined with topography. But the treatment of the grid was all done with the official machine. So there was a new layer of possibilities that was, well, especially became, this is my slide into the, okay, now officially over time. Going to the website, my favorite 404 page ever that Jurriaan, well, you know, that's the cool thing. I mean, my software was somehow involved to make this, and the style is obviously invented by Hansje van Haarlem, but Jurriaan made this. So, you know, and none of us could have done this all by ourselves. So this is it's been a very satisfying team effort and a very nice collaboration. Anyway, the website, there's a little interesting technical bit about this, well, there's a lot of graphics, there's a lot of typographic content on the website. So for instance, here you see this big banner. Well, now it's going away. Here there's a separate banner. Those are actually, they're not generated on the fly, but they are generated on the website. So even though originally our platform was Drawbot, which is actually Mac only, it's open source, but Mac only, but a whole bunch of functionality I ported over to a more cross-platform environment. And these things, so if the people who write the content of the website, if a new act is introduced, they type the name and then a process is started and a random background pattern animation from Jurriaan is chosen, and then dynamically the typography is overlaid on that, and like a few minutes later then there's this generated banner as video available. So in that sense it's all dynamically done on the web server. It's pretty slow, but it's working. At some point, I got some panicking phone calls from Mojo, the company behind Lowlands, that their web servers were grinding to a halt, more or less, and it had something to do with the generation of the banner videos. And I was like, oh my god! Luckily, I managed to find the issue. It was running out of memory. Somehow there was a mistake somewhere, and it just used unlimited memory, and well, that would grind down a web server. So that was not good. Luckily, they were very happy when I managed to fix it. Anyway, we'll go almost ready. I will just go through some more relatively arbitrary images of the results of this And you know, there's these patterns come back, and I feel like all these patterns somehow went through my code somehow. So even though I didn't invent the basic thing, there's still a lot of involvement in this. And for instance, this huge tent, the armadillo, was designed by Marjolein Rinkes, but based on those shapes. I mean, they're now treated and distorted a little bit, but the shapes originally come from my software. So I still feel I did something for that huge thing as well. So that's kind of neat. Okay, and this will be my final slide. So also large video screens where it was used. Hopefully next year there will be more. Our next challenge will be to apply this stuff in more real-time fashion, which is going to be a huge challenge. Anyway, to close it off, I was thinking, generative design. Well, we argued even about the pronunciation. It's a nice buzzword, and it explains quite nicely what is going on. I have one tiny issue with it, that it suggests that now your stuff is generated for you. But the design is actually is inside the algorithm, right? The program is the design now. So even with with machine learning, it becomes a little more complicated because it's so difficult. But don't you forget that. I mean, like if it's not like now computers will take over and design everything. No, well, there are people needed to make the algorithms to write the software. Creative coding, similar. It's a good word. On the other hand, it's a bit of a tautology or pleonasm in that all coding to me is creative. It's a very creative. You have to be very inventive to do any kind of coding. Anyway, that was it for me today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
No more time for questions, I suppose, because
I would love to still.
Yeah.
I mean, if people have questions, I can see they do.
Woo.
Hello, great presentation, Hi. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd really love to see the live demo instead of questions. I don't know if that's a possibility. Maybe there are more people who want to see the live demo that you skipped.
It's not super. Yeah, I mean, we can do that instead of questions. It's not super exciting, but just go. Shall I go back to the? All right, this will be one huge disappointment then.
Thank you.
Where am I? Okay, live demo. I don't actually have to go to that slide to switch to my live demo, but otherwise my mind doesn't work correctly. Anyway, so here we now actually in Drawbot, the application, where you have a window where, well, like I said, you can draw. Now I'm going to do live. This is a program that draws a rectangle. Anyway, Lowlands is a bit more complicated. So in the end, there's a huge library that I wrote that will be imported, and then what Hansje and Marjolein are using are these kind of templates of parameters that they can change. They can change the dimensions of what we're drawing with, the actual content, in this case just a bit of text, so this is pretty much old school. But we can change this. So for instance, we're saying hello, so let's run it again, and then there's hello. But I did digital or Lowlands anyway. So, but also images can be loaded instead of text. Layers can be made. I will definitely not demonstrate that. But I'm going to zoom in a little bit because the parameters are kind of neat to play with. So the grid can be changed from finer to coarse depending on what is needed. The grid can be changed in direction. There are some additional effects like drop certain lines or drop those lines. There's for the horizontal versus the vertical lines, and all these parameters are also animatable. I will not demonstrate that now because then we'll have to generate some video, and it's not super fast, all this. But anyway, so a lot of the graphic design, poor Hansje and Marjolein, they're working a lot with tweaking these numbers to make their designs, and then usually they have to post-process it anyway in Illustrator. One of the big things we did in the second year was to identify what are their bottlenecks, what is taking too much time, and I added some features to make their life a little easier. So. But anyway, so it's the whole generative design or creative coding. It's all about custom software, right? I mean, you can do your designs in Illustrator and Photoshop and InDesign, but at some point you want to do things that are not possible there, and then this whole technology comes in, and it gives you just this big new world where you can play with. I think Patrick already in his first few slides explained it quite well. I agreed with every single slide that he was put in there, the way it was described. So yeah, it's about taking control over that pesky machine that is really very stupid. You have to talk to it in very stupid terms, so it will do what you want. But then you get something back by teaching yourself. And yeah, like I think what Tim also said, it's really something that everyone, or both of them, it's really something that anyone can learn. There are courses, programming, and it's also, indeed, it's fascinating and cool. So anyway, that was not a question, but
Thank you very much. Big round of applause. I was going to ask if you can also generate your own entry tickets from here as well.
That's difficult. Yeah, no. The wristbands are like that's why they're made of like this fabric or something. They're made in a very special way. No, but I got a guest ticket anyway. Haha. So I didn't have to.
Okay. So right. Before we wrap everything up, thank you very much, Just.
You're welcome.
We have one of the organization from Digital Wednesday, Ewout, who wants to give the closing word. So thank you, everybody, and I hope to see you next time.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for being here, and thank you for watching at home. Believe it or not, but we do this every month. So at the end of November, we're talking about the war on digital talent. Design, marketing, communication, whatever. But in the meantime, if you are inspired by this evening, we do invite you to stay here, to discuss here, and to drink. And that's wonderful if you are inspired in this way. So thank you very much for being here tonight, and see you next time. Bye-bye.